Hi, everyone. Welcome to Restitch America. My name is Alma Ohene-Opare, and I'm very excited to be here with you today. This is episode number 3 of season 2 of Restitch America. And today I have with me a special guest. Now, many of you heard from this guest, Tina McCafferty, last week when she interviewed me, and I posted it on my podcast. And so you've already heard from her interviewing me, but this week we are reciprocating. And so this time I am going to be interviewing Tina. And actually what we're going to do today is just have an open discussion on what is happening around the world. And so we had planned originally to talk in general about, Tina's background, and we're still going to do that a little bit in the beginning, and what her goals and what her dreams and what her impressions are about the country. But today I feel like we have to dedicate time to a phenomenon that is taking root in our country. So we'll talk about that a little more later on. But let's start by welcoming Tina into the studio of Restitch America. Tina, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hello, Alma. Thank you again for having me. And I have to say, a really funny thing is you got out your podcast episode with me before I even got it out because your episode is coming out on Friday. So you're way ahead of the ball game.
That's awesome. That's great. So, um, Tina, just tell us a little bit about why you became a speaker and an advocate for the things that you believe in. Give us a little bit of a snippet of your journey to this point, and then we'll jump on from there into what is happening in the news.
Okay. Well, my name is Tina, like he said. I am a stay-at-home mom. I have been for over 20 years. I'm really blessed that my husband makes enough so that I do not have to go to work. And for those of you who want to go to work, that's fine. I never did. So I was lucky enough to be able to stay home. I have always had a great love for this country. Alma and I are of the same faith, and that faith teaches us that America has a divine purpose. I have always believed that. I do not believe that America came to be by chance. There was divine intervention for those people, men like George Washington, who came in and helped to create this government, this experiment. And I believe with every fiber of my being that there still is a great work for America to do. And it came to a point a few years ago where I felt like the founding fathers were really under attack. I mean, they always have been, but it seemed to reach a fervor a few years ago. And I didn't know what to do. At the time, I had been taking an online business class. And one of the things that our instructor asked us to do was to do a podcast trailer. She said, I don't even care if you do a podcast after that. Just practice by doing a podcast trailer, because a lot of times a podcast can be an instrument for your business, whatever that is. So I did that, and I was thinking, what do I want to do it on? And I went completely opposite of what I even was planning on doing for a business. I did a podcast trailer for America. And after I did this trailer, something spoke to me that I need to do my part, no matter how small that is, to tell American stories. Because I also think that there is an epidemic of many Americans who don't understand what it means to be free, who do not understand what the cost is of being free. I began a podcast called We the People, Our American Story. And most of the guests that I have are veterans, combat survivors, first responders, and patriots like Alma. I want to tell their stories. I want people to know that it is okay, more than okay, to love your country. And that some of the people who have been through the most and have the most reasons to hate America, men who have lost limbs, who have lost vision because they were fighting and protecting our country, I'm telling you, they are the ones who love this country the most. And we need more Americans to understand how blessed they are to call America home.
That is amazing. And just like you, I have described myself as a cheerleader for America. I feel like it's become very fashionable for people to bash their own country. And we're growing basically a new generation of Americans who have no appreciation for the privilege they have to be born in this country. They do not see the divine role of this country as a bastion of peace and stability for the world. And what my hope has always been is to be a voice to rekindle that idea. And a lot of times what I get from people when I talk about this is they say, well, look at all these problems that America has as compared to, some European country or whatever. And I tell them, America is not special because we're perfect in the way we run our government. America is not special because we do everything right. But America is special because our founding principles are divinely inspired. And although we have not always lived up to those founding principles, it does not negate the divine nature of those principles. And those principles are what have transformed the world for the most part and made the world livable and peaceful and free in many areas for the most part. And so the propagation of those values and those principles are crucial, not only to the maintenance of this country as a leader of the free world, but also to the maintenance of the rest of the world. And so this is something that is really important. And as Americans, a crucial responsibility for us to uphold those values. And that's what I'm hoping to do. And this week, I feel the events in Israel and the Middle East have proven a great divide between those who recognize the difference between good and evil, those who recognize that there's a dichotomy that is not reconcilable between the acts of barbarism that we saw and any claim to resistance or revolution. And what has really, really affected me this week is to watch our fellow citizens, fellow immigrants like me, Congress people who cannot be unequivocal in condemning evil when it stares them right in the face. So I wanted to ask you how you heard about the events and your feelings as those reports started coming through the news.
Well, much to my husband's chagrin, I spend way too much time on social media, which he says affects me in not a good way. Because everything is bad on Instagram. So that is, of course, how I found out about it. And when the news started flooding in about the horrendous, despicable acts that were done in the name of freedom for Hamas, it's hard to comprehend, don't you think? I can't even comprehend what is going on there. And in fact, there was something on Instagram today that I saw about a lady that was for Palestine. And she was talking about how the atrocious reports that are coming in are untrue. They're lies. They're not really happening. And as far as this conflict that goes on and on, it subsides and then it comes up again and then it subsides. And there is what I think is so funny is I hear people say, well, why can't they just work it out? Why can't these two just work it out without violence? And I think you and I both know, Alma, and a lot of people, that these people, Hamas, their ideology is so frantic and so convoluted. You can't talk to people like that. They are not reasonable. Americans who think that these two sides can just sit down and talk it out, it's not going to happen because their ideology is just freaky. I'll say it. It's freaky. It makes no sense. It's scary. It's nightmarish. It's evil. It's the devil. There's no way that these two sides can sit down and work it out. People that are willing and happy, you've seen probably also about how they're holding their phones. They are calling people. I saw a story about how they were on this woman's Facebook, contacted her family, and they watched their grandmother get killed on Facebook. That is disgusting. That's not a person. That is an animal. That is a beast. That is someone who does not care about human life and the sanctity of human life. It's not sacred to them.
Now, one thing I notice, anytime there's a conflict or there's some kind of issue, political or otherwise, there is a tendency for evildoers to conflate issues. Okay. And the conflation is here, right? Hamas, a terrorist organization, commits acts that are despicable. No question about it. These acts are barbaric. However, the people protesting are not saying free Hamas. They're saying free Palestine. So what they're doing is they're conflating two things, right? So they're saying if you are anti-Hamas, a terrorist organization, somehow you are anti the rights of the Palestinian people, who in many cases did not sign up for this, right? And if Hamas cares about the Palestinians, they knew very well that there would be a retaliation. And they knew that the people who will fall at the brunt of that retaliation will be the people they claim they want to liberate. And they've got a lot of people in the West completely fooled to the point where they conflate the two. And the case in point is here. So I posted a video that condemned the attacks. And I posted a video after I saw some of those atrocities recorded and put online by the terrorists who committed them. And as I was watching these videos, I thought I was going to be strong. There was a lot of viewer discretion warnings. I thought I was going to be strong. And I'm like, and it's not for some macabre desire on my part to want to see those videos, but I wanted to make sure that when the inevitable, denials come in, when people begin to rewrite history, when those things happen, I can say I saw with my own eyes these atrocities. I wanted to be a witness of those atrocities, so I could be a someone who could buck that tide when it eventually comes. And so I prepared myself emotionally, thinking, I'm pretty tough. I could just, watch these really quickly, get through them, so I can be that witness. And I could not. I started watching. I watched a couple of videos, and I literally had to put my hand over my phone and hide myself from the horror that was occurring before my eyes. And I realized as I was doing that I am here thousands of miles away. If I can't endure just looking secondhand at these things, how much more the people who are actually enduring it, the people who are actually kidnapped right now. So I felt compelled to post a video and talk about it and condemn it. So I did. And very interestingly, I started receiving comments from people who followed me. And I wanted to share one of those comments that I got with you here. So this person says, I've followed you for a while. And what is sad is that you're choosing a side between two states who do this to each other. And it all started because Israel took their land. Why are Israelis and Jews more important than Palestinians and Muslims? Make it make sense. And they ended the post with unfollow. And I want to read you my response to this person so you can kind of get an idea of where I am. This is my response. If you are telling me that killing and beheading 40 babies and raping and murdering women and shooting defenseless partygoers and elderly people and going door to door and killing entire families and using a hoe to behead someone on camera and recording and posting this video for the world to see does nothing to your conscience, I am sorry I can't be there with you. This is not about politics. This is not about a cycle of violence between two countries. This is not about apartheid or occupation. This is pure evil. And if you are willing to make excuses for evil, I can't follow you on that path. When ISIS was brutally murdering and killing people and drowning them and beheading them, did you ask about their grievances with the West? When school shooters slaughtered innocent children, did you analyze their grievances with their bullies? When terrorists flew planes into the World Trade Center, did you evaluate America's foreign policy in the Middle East? All these acts were evil and despicable. I don't condone anything bad Israel has ever done, but I will not be silent or give cover to this evil by claiming there are bad people on both sides. This attack is not about a land dispute. And even if it were, do you think these actions are a justification for a land dispute? What would you say to someone who, like many, are making these arguments about both sides?
Number one, it's a fact that it is Hamas that are sending these horrendous videos, while people who do bad things, disgusting things, hide in the shadows. They relish putting it in the forefront so that you can see those atrocities. What kind of human does that, number one? Number two, while there has been conflict between Israel and Palestine for, centuries, let's look at the fact that Hamas actively went after families, children, babies, women. That totally floors me. It makes me sick to my stomach. And I can't wrap my brain around it, and I can't get inside the head of someone who would say that the blame for this to this extent is on both sides. I don't get it.
And
Don't get it.
when those people are representatives of our government, that even takes it to a worse position. We heard news that there were 31 students associations at Harvard that put out a statement supporting the events of the last few days. We also heard from Black Lives Matter that also did the same. I just was listening to a podcast where someone was talking and saying that Hamas is not a terrorist organization. And this person was speaking in Michigan to a crowd. We heard in Australia chants of people saying gas the Jews.
I think that's all over the world. It's happening in America even.
And today, I think what is happening is, of course, very tragic. And the aftermath is going to be even more tragic because innocent lives will continue to be lost. However, I feel like the world is shifting. The foundations upon which the world, our civilization is built, those foundations are being tested. And in this test, one thing that is happening, which I believe is a sign of the times is that evil is revealing itself in very clear terms. And what I believe personally is that this is the opportunity, or this is the time when men have to decide who you're for, right? This is the time when our allegiances have to be clear. This is the time when we have to say, this is evil and this is good, and I choose the side of good over evil. When I came to America, if you called someone a socialist, it was so scandalous, so scandalous. There was no Democrat that I knew who was openly calling themselves socialists.
And now it's applauded.
But today, that has completely changed, where people are embracing ideologies that a decade, 2 decades ago would have been considered anti-American. Today, those are been brought into the light, and people are embracing those ideologies. And the truth is, our fidelity to our Constitution allows them to hold these views, even though those views are largely anti-American. However, what this is doing for us is it's telling us is the separation of the wheat from the tares. Nobody is going to be surprised which side they end up on in God's kingdom, right? And today, people are coming out and telling us who they are. And my advice to the world is believe them when they tell you. And something happened in Israel today that I thought was very interesting. They actually set up a unity government. The two opposing parties came together, the leaders of the two opposing parties came together and now have formed a unity government to fight this war that they have declared. And as I thought about that, I thought, doesn't it take tragedy to help us recognize that we have much more in common, right? Suddenly, all the lines wipe away, and people realize that we are one people with one common cause, and that we have to unite against the enemy, right? And it had to take a tragedy of this proportion to help people see that. That happened here as well after 9/11. Suddenly, we were no more left, right, center. We were all Americans. I wasn't at the time, but we were all Americans. And
hopeful
even
Americans.
from all the way in Africa, we were all Americans. And hopefully, I don't know if that changes the paradigm of conversation in our country and elsewhere.
Well, I get very downtrodden. I'll be honest. I get really downtrodden about the state of America and where a lot of our fellow citizens are. Because for me, my husband always is very good about trying to see the other side. I have a really hard time with that, Alma. I'll be honest, I do. Because a lot of times I see things as right or wrong. And when I see something as being wrong, it is really hard for me to try to get inside that person's head and see how that person might be feeling about the situation and be polar opposite. Because in my head, I'm going, there's no way. There's no way that that person can actually think that this is okay. There's no way. We are so soft as Americans that is a very grave concern for me. I'm concerned that masculinity is looked down upon right now because times are tough, and unfortunately, they're probably going to get tougher. And what we need more now than ever, I believe, is masculine men. But if you're a masculine man, then to whoever else that opens up all this other can of worms that's not even there. I have a lot of concerns for America and where we are and where our values are and where our morals are.
I think,
And go ahead.
go ahead.
Well, I went to California this past weekend. My husband, one of his bucket list items was to see a Dallas Cowboys game. It didn't turn out very well for him. I think the final score was 42-10, not in favor. It was for San Francisco. But as I went there to this state that I call almost a police state, I cannot believe the things that go on in that state and anybody who'd want to live there. As soon as we got off the airplane in San Francisco, like the amount of mask wearers went totally up. And I can tell you it was really surreal. Alma, this is so weird. I don't know why this was surreal to me, but we had a very long drive on the freeway, which was another reason I could never live in that state. But we stopped just at a strip mall and had Subway. And as we're looking outside of Subway as we're eating, they have these stations set up for Tesla. And there are like 6 cars that are at these Tesla charging stations. All the Teslas look the same. I don't know why that was really weird to me. It was almost like a I will comply thing. They were all like the same make and model, all getting charged. And then we walked over to Target, I think was what it was. And half of the beauty goods and makeup were all locked up. And I don't know why, just that small time in that parking lot area, in that parking strip, in that strip mall made such a big impression on me, but it did because it seemed so surreal. I almost felt like I was in the Hunger Games, and I'm probably hyperbolizing this a lot. And then as you drive through California, all the homeless encampments along the freeway, I just thought, man, aren't we better than this? Aren't we better than this? And I cannot wait to get back to Utah where I'm still free.
I see basically what is happening to our country, not only to our country, but to our culture. It's seismic attacks on the foundations that have made us who we are, right? It's almost like building a home on a foundation and then having your children and grandchildren come and begin to tear out that foundation. And they have a concerted effort to tear out these foundations, not realizing that the house is supported by these foundations. They believe they can create a better world. And that's their motivation. And somehow they have been indoctrinated, or they've talked themselves into believing that the things that are holding them back are the foundations that have established our dominance in the world. And so they are going and trying to take down the blocks and pillars of our foundation. And that is what we're seeing. The fact that we can't agree anymore on what is true. What is truth? The fact that we hear things like my truth and your truth. The fact that we can't even understand and agree on, biological terms. The fact that, we are at our throats on every basic principle, even, simple truths about our existence here on this earth. And that seismic shift is going to sweep throughout our nation anyone who does not know the rock upon which they stand. Right? You alluded to the fact that you and I are from the same religious tradition. And one of the scriptures that we believe in, a scripture that I love a lot, talks about the foundation and establishing your foundation on Jesus Christ. And so that when the devil shall send forth his mighty winds, yea, his shafts in the whirlwind, when all his hail and his mighty storm shall beat upon you, it shall have no power over you, because of the rock upon which you are built, which is a sure foundation, a foundation whereon if men build, they cannot fall. So the question to us is, what foundation are you standing on? What rock are you standing on? Or are you trying to go along to get along to the point where you're standing on a sandy foundation, where these seismic shifts are pushing you to and fro? And these are the things, the conversations that we need to be having, especially among our youth. The question is, how do we speak to these things in a way that is persuasive, in a way that is not divisive, in a way that truly allows them to analyze critically the importance of the foundations that have established what we have today, right? And that is my biggest fear for our country. My biggest fear is that I can't go outside and expect that the person standing next to me is just like me, right? I can't go outside and expect that if I'm looking at the atrocities of Hamas, that the person standing next to me wouldn't say, here's my excuse for why that is okay.
Alma, I have a question for you because I don't understand it, and maybe you can help me understand. How do people justify what Hamas is doing? Explain that to me because I don't understand. I don't understand. Where does that come from?
I think there are multiple things that are at play. First, a lot of people have refused to see. Okay. And this happened in Germany as well.
Mm-hmm.
Were Germans who refused to see.
Right.
They refused to acknowledge the things that were happening in their backyard. They closed their eyes. And I think about it and I think this is akin to the story of the Israelites when they were in the desert and Moses said, you're being bitten by snakes. And all you had to do was look at the brass serpent. And there were people who refused to see.
Too easy.
Refused to look. Okay, so I think that's part of what is happening here. People are refusing to look. And that's why I wanted to separate myself from that group by enduring the few minutes that I did in looking and opening my eyes so that I could be unequivocal in saying I saw the atrocities, right? So one, people are refusing to see. And because they're refusing to see, they can minimize those actions without feeling the necessary guilt that will come with anyone who sides with this kind of evil, right? Because it's almost like, you've seen those three monkeys, right? See no evil, hear no evil. And so if I don't see it, then it really doesn't exist, right? So that's one. I also think that we have a dearth of trust in our country, in our institutions. So there are people who are in a default position, distrustful of any messaging that they get from the media. And because there's this dearth of trust, when you show people things, the people who are willing to see now have questions around, is this manufactured? Is this AI? Is this generated? We've been lied to so many times by government institutions. Why should we believe them this time? Right? So you have a little bit of that. But it all boils down, if you sum it all up, to a certain sense of denial of the realities on the ground, right? So when you don't see or you refuse to see what is actually happening, then the next point of refuge is that there's this idea that everybody seems to be glomming onto, which is this idea of oppression, right? This idea of oppression, it's become such a huge narrative, especially in America. And so people who naturally do not have any affiliation with certain groups, as soon as those groups claim or jump onto this bandwagon of oppression, suddenly they now have things in common. So yesterday I saw a group in the US with a giant flag saying Queers for Palestine.
They have no clue.
Exactly, right? Because the thing that they're uniting on is this idea of oppression, not recognizing that they have absolutely nothing in common with the sensibilities of the people who live in those areas.
I mean, not even realizing that they're the first ones that are going to be killed.
Exactly. And what they don't realize, and this is something that someone said that I think most people don't think about. Let's assume that you believe the news, the propaganda around the so-called occupation or apartheid or so on. The militants who committed those atrocities, they didn't know whether the Israelis on the other side were people who were in their spare time, supporting the freedom of Palestine. They didn't know that. Many of these people were college students, which means that many of them, a majority of them, could possibly be people who are on the side of peace for Palestine. But they killed people indiscriminately. And so I don't think anybody's sleeping at night after seeing those videos and saying this was good. But they're hiding behind this idea of universal oppression with an oppressor, and the default is to take the side of the so-called underdog in that situation. And that is what I believe is happening. But my hope is that when the atrocities are eventually revealed to the world, when those atrocities are eventually revealed, that it would be untenable for anyone, completely untenable for anyone to continue their support without creating an internal conflict within themselves, which will relegate them to the outskirts of, I would say, any kind of mainstream American, thought, right? It's the same thing with all the other culture wars that we're fighting in America today. You remember people have talked about the banning of books and things like that as rhetoric against people who are fighting against the sexualization of their children. And I know this may seem like it's off topic, but I'm going to connect the two. It's the fact that a lot of the people who are against these things, they call it book banning, right? And once again, I talked about conflation, right? They conflate ideas. They are not specific as a way to obfuscate what exactly is happening. And then they deny that there's anything wrong with what these kids are being exposed to. And then guess what? They are forced to be exposed to it. So a few weeks ago, you saw the Senator Kennedy reading out of those books in the Senate and revealing the horrors, the complete and utter garbage that was being made available to children. And they couldn't hide anymore, to the point that the author of one of those books came out and said, this book was not written for kids. They finally had to admit that the people calling for those books to be removed from schools were right, because the content was garbage. And so my hope is that as much as possible, we do not allow people to hide and pretend these things are not happening. And that is why we must show them what is happening. Growing up in Africa, I remember some of the atrocities that were happening in places like Liberia during their civil war. My aunt was caught in that struggle, and so many people were brutalized and murdered. And my aunt had to walk from Liberia all the way back to her home country of Ghana. And the story she told us as we were young kids sitting at her feet, listening to the atrocities that she saw, the mass graves and the complete annihilation of people, villages, towns, human beings. You understood and saw the face of evil, and it was very clear. I don't know if you've seen the movie. There's a movie called Blood Diamonds that follows the story, or a documentary that follows the story of what was going on in Sierra Leone, where these militants came through and would attack villages and rape women and brutalize people. And they would leave a mark where they would call upon the villagers, and they would come with machetes, and they would say, do you want a long sleeve or a short sleeve? And what they meant was, did you want to be amputated, your arms to be amputated at your wrists or at your shoulder? And they went through the village and systematically amputated limbs in villages. That was evil. That was evil because their claim was that these people used their hands to vote for a government that this group was against. And so anyone who voted or anyone who was purported to be in support of the government at the time had to have their arms chopped off. And so you have entire generations of people today in various parts of Sierra Leone with no arms. That is evil. And you cannot have any justification for that kind of barbarism. There is no political, intellectual, or coherent argument that you can make to justify this kind of evil against human beings. And anyone who attempts to do so, I believe, is not only suborning evil, but those feelings will, if they do not repent, I would say, will come back to stand as a witness against them. Because remember, God says, look it upon the heart. And whatever is in your heart is what you will be judged by. And so that's all I can say about what is happening. And I'm hoping that people will not bury their heads in the sand. Because many times as human beings today, we tend to look back and we say, oh, if I were in that position, I would have done better. If I were a German in the Nazi era, I would have saved some Jews. If I were, in ISIS territory, I would have protected some people. If I were, and yet when we're given the opportunity from the safety of our own homes, we can't even speak to the support of people who are being destroyed and annihilated by evil. We're no better than the people who stood by and watched millions of their fellow men brutalized, pretending it didn't happen.
Well, that's saying I'm going to butcher it, but the only thing it takes for evil to move forward is for good men to say nothing. And I think there are too many Americans that are silent right now. They're afraid of the repercussions, and we need to use our voices to stand up for what is right to keep this country the greatest country on earth. We need people to use their voices. You need to vote, and you need to, when you see something that is wrong, you need to call it out.
Yep. Then that's the bottom line. And this is something that I believe is going to be the most important value that is required over the next decade. It's courage.
Mm-hmm.
The courage to speak against evil, even if you speak alone.
Mm-hmm.
Courage to stand against evil, even if you stand alone. The courage to fight against evil, even if you fight alone. Where do we summon that courage? I say that courage can only come from the Creator. That courage can only come from the one who has said that if we put our trust in him, right, he will deliver us from bondage. I believe that sincerely. And as they say, and should we die before our journey is through, happy day, all is well, right? And that is my goal. My goal is to be that voice, and I'm really excited that you are also being that voice and sharing the stories of Americans so that we don't forget not just what is happening today, but also the stories of courage, the stories of goodness, the stories of what makes us distinct as a people or peculiar as a people, the stories about our founding and our founders and the people who put their lives on the line to defend this great nation. I am grateful that you are doing that. We need more people like you to speak up. And today, I believe it is divinely appointed, the technologies that we have to be able to speak up. That if they say, to whom much is given, much is required. And if nothing at all, I will say, if you're listening to us today, I would say, take a stand. Talk to your families about what is happening. Don't pretend as if, we can sweep this under the rug. Take a stand. Write in your journals what you thought about what was happening. Because maybe one day your children and those who come after us may look upon you and draw some courage for the fights that they have to take on, which may even be more severe than what we're seeing today.
I agree wholeheartedly. Amen to that, Alma.
Thank you so much for joining me today.
You are welcome.
This, I believe, was a conversation that needed to be had. And I hope you all who are listening today can share this episode with as many people as possible so that they can hear as well and hopefully can be inspired to take on the mantle and take on, as we would say, the title of liberty and go out there and defend what they know is right and true.
Don't let your love of America be silent.
Don't let it be silent, definitely. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'll come back to you again next week. So like, follow, subscribe. And Tina, before we go, tell us how people can find you so they can also join your gang and help support your movement.
My gang. Okay, fellow patriots, you can go to my website at www.wethepeopleouramericanstory.com. You can sign up for a newsletter there, and also you can find all the platforms available for you to listen to the podcast. If you want to hear great Americans share their love about America and what they were willing to do to protect our country, their families, their loved ones, you will love this podcast. Thank you so much, Alma.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And hopefully when we meet again, we will meet under better circumstances. Hopefully the world will be even better for having people like you in it, talking and uplifting and helping people recognize the privilege they have as Americans. So we'll see you all next week. Thank you very much.